Kentrell Gaulden. How are you today, Mr. Williams?
Good morning, Your Honor. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Thank you.
Mr. Gaulden also has counsel online. If you would please state your names for the record.
Jeremy DeSean appearing for Mr. Gaulden as well.
Your Honor, Drew Finley, appearing remotely as well. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Williams, I understand that perhaps there's going to be a change of plea today. Is that correct?
That is, Your Honor.
All right. Would you go ahead and please state for the record what the plea agreement is that has been reached with the state?
Yes, Your Honor. It is anticipated that my client will be entering guilty pleas to counts 2 through 7, count 13, count 16, count 19, and count 22. And there are other parameters to this agreement. Would you like me to put those on the record now?
Yes, please. And that's a Class A misdemeanor.
And those are all Class A misdemeanors. There are 6 of those. And all of those the counts I just recited the ends are all the pharmacy fraud cases. We are asking the court to waive time for sentencing. I have some specific requests as it relates to sentencing about the language, but the agreement is that my client will pay a $25,000 fine to the court. And Your Honor, I have a cashier's check in hand. I'm holding it now that I would like to publish to the court at the end of this. Upon payment of that, the state has agreed to a 402 reduction for each of those 4 felony counts. They would all be reduced to Class A misdemeanors, and the case would close at that point in time.
With credit for time served?
No credit for time served, and that has to do with his pending federal sentencing and an anticipated sentence within the Bureau of Prisons. So what we're asking is for the court to give no credit for any time served and to simply close the case.
Okay, let's have a counsel just approach and we'll just have a brief discussion at the bench here. I mean, you might. All right, I was able to meet with the attorneys at Sidebar and just to try to better understand a global resolution that is happening in Mr. Gaulden's state cases and with his federal case. I wanted to better understand how that global resolution would play into this case and whether or not the court felt comfortable moving forward with accepting the plea bargain and imposing a sentence in conjunction with the stipulated resolution that the parties have represented to the court. I'm going to give Mr. Williams a chance to put on the record just a little bit more detail about what's happening with the federal sentence and the amount of incarceration that Mr. Gaulden will be receiving as to why it might make some sense for the court to accept the plea bargain. Go ahead, Mr. Williams.
Your Honor, thank you. I'm happy to do that. Your Honor, the agreement that my client has reached with the government, the federal government, is he's already entered this plea. This is a matter of public record. He reached an agreement that has yet to be accepted by the district court. I should qualify that a sentence of incarceration of 27 months in the Bureau of Prisons would be a reasonable sentence. And we're awaiting sentencing on that currently. But the position here is that is a significant sentence. Candidly, it could be that if he were sent to the Utah State Prison on this, the board may release him far sooner than that. But he's going to do this 27 months within federal custody, which is why we're asking the court to follow this recommendation and this plea agreement that we've reached of just closing the case now. Then he can go and remain in federal custody and go do that time when that sentence is handed down.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Keller, is there any?
Your Honor, if I may, I'm sorry.
You may.
Thank you so much. Mr. DeSean and I have been communicating. One thing we want to bring up, and that is that in our negotiations, which have been extensive with Mr. Keller, one of the things that we talked about that there would be a no contest, and I'll let Mr. Williams explain that in person, but that these would be entered no contest. And Mr. DeSean and I just wanted to make sure that was clear with the court.
Okay, thank you for helping me better understand that, Mr. Finling. Mr. DeSean?
And Your Honor, not to gang up on the proceedings here with the three of us, but I would add to something that Mr. Williams said, which is that not only does the federal resolution contemplate a 27-month prison sentence, but it also contemplates a consecutive term of 60 months of supervised probation. So there will be a probationary component to that sentence as well that will follow the custodial sentence.
And as part of that federal probationary period, would Mr. Gaulden be required to, I assume he would be subject to probation searches that would involve ensuring that he is not possessing or using any dangerous weapons, such as firearms, likewise, no illegal drugs or alcohol, things of that nature?
That's correct, Your Honor. And federal probation is a sort of unique animal in the sense that it's akin to probationary terms in the state, which is to say that they could impose the entire sentence that it was initially available to impose if there were to be a violation. But he would have federal probation officers for that period of time.
And Your Honor, I would just add to that too, built within the federal code is any violation of probation that includes possession of a controlled substance requires automatic revocation of the term of probation. So there is a lot riding on our client doing well after the Bureau of Prison Time and then for 5 years on probation.
Very well. Anything further that you would like to put on the record at this time, Mr. Keller?
Your Honor, just briefly, the state is in agreement with the plan of action that's being set forth before the court. This is somewhat of a unique case where there have been multiple jurisdictions involved, both multiple jurisdictions in the federal and in the state systems. There's been conversations across all parties and across the representatives for the government in each of those cases as well to ensure that a proper disposition is reached globally across these cases. And so this is just really a smaller cog in the bigger wheel of ultimately seeking justice against Mr. Gaulden.
I assume then that the Weber County case, which I understand there is a charge in Weber County or maybe charges, is that going to be part of this global resolution as well?
That's correct, Your Honor. There have been conversations with Weber County, and it's my understanding, I believe, that plea has already been taken in Weber County.
That case has been dismissed. That gave rise to the federal case. So same conduct. There's been a plea entered in federal court. The state dismissed their charge.
Very good. Thank you. All right. Mr. Gaulden, have you had enough time to speak to your attorneys about this decision to enter into this plea bargain?
Yes.
Have they gone over with you the rights that you would be waiving by accepting this plea bargain and entering no contest pleas and being sentenced today and having this case closed?
Yes.
Do you understand that a no contest plea has the same effect as a guilty plea in a lot of ways? The court will sentence someone on a no contest plea the same as it would a guilty plea, although you would still be maintaining your innocence. You would acknowledge that the government has sufficient evidence to meet each and every element of the charges that you would be pleading no contest to.
Yes.
Mr. Gaulden, are you under the influence of any drugs or alcohol today?
No.
Are you on any medications right now?
No.
Are you thinking clearly today and understanding everything that's happening in court?
Yes.
Has anybody forced you or coerced you to get you to accept this plea bargain?
No.
Are you pleading no contest today because you believe that the government does have sufficient evidence to be able to prove each of these each of the 10 charges that you would be entering a no contest plea to today beyond a reasonable doubt?
No.
Are you acknowledging that even though you're maintaining your innocence, that the government would still be able to prove these charges in court potentially, and so you believe it's in your best interest to accept a plea bargain.
No.
In order for me to accept your no contest plea, I just need to better understand and make sure that you are acknowledging that the global resolution of these cases is in your best interest, and that there is some basis for you to be accepting the plea bargain. There is some evidence that you believe would justify you accepting the plea bargain. Are you able to acknowledge that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Has he been able to sign that statement of defendant supporting his no contest plea?
Your Honor, I did not know the court's policy. I'm going to have him sign this before Your Honor.
Very good.
If I could approach.
Just hand that to the bailiff, please. Thank you. Mr. Gaulden, I just want to make sure that you have reviewed and read this entire document, which is entitled Statement of Defendant Supporting Your Plea and Certification of Counsel. Have you read this document?
Yes.
Do you have any questions about the rights you would be waiving by accepting the plea bargain?
No.
Okay. Let's have a factual basis to support the 10 charges he's pleading to.
Your Honor, the defendant is ultimately criminally responsible, particularly under Utah Code 76-202, for a large-scale prescription drug fraud ring that has been known to have acquired various prescription medications, specifically promethazine with codeine, which is a cough suppressant that's a heavily abused Schedule 5 controlled substance in the state of Utah. And those were secured from multiple pharmacies in Cache County, as well as other pharmacies in northern Utah. Mr. Gaulden had acted with others in this criminal activity, particularly where there were 2 co-defendants, which were recently had their cases resolved before this court. And those co-defendants were intercepted as they were trying to pick up the fraudulent prescription at Larry's Pharmacy in Smithfield here in Cache County. Those 2 individuals were using Mr. Gaulden's vehicle to make the pickup, and they were detained by law enforcement. And shortly thereafter, someone contacted law enforcement, pretending to be an elderly woman to whom the fraudulent prescription belonged. The prescription was listed to be for a Gwendolyn Cox, but this elderly woman, who was clearly someone pretending to be an elderly woman, said her name was Gwendolyn White and couldn't provide a birth year. This is important because fraudulent names such as Beatrice White, Bethel White, Carolyn White, Harriet White, Anna White, and Gwendolyn White were all being used through this scheme. There were 2 other pharmacists here in Cache County that immediately recognized this fake elderly woman's voice from that phone call as the same person who had called into their pharmacies checking in on a prescription under some of those aforementioned names for promethazine with codeine. And all of these prescriptions had been called in by someone portraying themselves to be a Dr. James Woodmansey, who is a legitimate doctor in the Provo, Utah area, but he was contacted by law enforcement and by several of these other prescription outlets, and he had verified that these were all fraudulent prescriptions that he had not authorized. Ultimately, Mr. Gaulden ended up in contact with the detective investigating this case when he was trying to get his vehicle out of impound after it was taken from the Larry's Pharmacy incident. During that phone call, Mr. Gaulden had engaged in a conversation with a third person and had asked him about the prescription they picked up. At that time, it became clear that Mr. Gaulden had some involvement beyond simply lending his vehicle to be used, where he had some knowledge of the fraudulent prescription being retrieved. In addition, there was 1 prescription called in for Kentrell Gaulden, but the date of birth for that prescription was in 1953, which was clearly a false date of birth and is consistent with some of those date of births used with the false elderly women names throughout this fraudulent scheme. That prescription was picked up by an individual who was intercepted by law enforcement. Shortly thereafter, promethazine with codeine, along with other prescriptions, had been called in to that same pharmacy for Mr. Gaulden. Utilizing his accurate date of birth. Mr. Gaulden, however, while he was on a federal probation, was only afforded a single doctor to issue prescriptions with a single pharmacy, and the doctor who called that prescription in was inconsistent, and that pharmacy was inconsistent with those which had been allowed through probation. In the end, there was a search warrant executed on Mr. Gaulden's residence. Law enforcement found a prescription bottle in Mr. Gaulden's bathroom inside the master bedroom. The bottle was for a Caroline White, one of the known fraudulent names, with the corresponding prescribing doctor who had confirmed the fraud. The prescription was for doxycycline, and the prescription bottle was consistent with the time frame and patient information for the promethazine with codeine that had also been picked up, according to a subsequently gathered Doppel report. Also in the bathroom was a prescription for doxycycline to Kentrell DeSean Gaulden, also prescribed by the same doctor and the previously confirmed as fraud. This is consistent with the promethazine with codeine that had been prescribed with Kentrell's fake date of birth, and a prescription bottle of promethazine with codeine was also found inside the defendant's bathroom with no prescription label on the bottle. And a further search of the defendant's residence yielded 3 more bottles of promethazine with codeine. More specifically to these counts, Your Honor, on September 19th of 2023, Reed's Pharmacy in Hiram received a prescription called in for a Bethel White with a claimed date of birth of November 10th of 1949. On September 19th, 2023, Spence's Pharmacy received a similar phone call for a Gwendolyn Cox with a fraudulent date of birth. On October 9th, 2023, Spence's Pharmacy received such a phone call with a fraudulent name. Cache Valley Pharmacy in North Logan had a prescription called in for a fraudulent individual. And on January 17th, 2024, Larry's Pharmacy in Smithfield received a call also from a fraudulent individual. Cook's Brothers Pharmacy in Providence in Cache County had a fraudulent prescription called in, and the Budge Clinic Pharmacy in Logan also had a fraudulent prescription called in. So ultimately, for each time a prescription was called in, there were 3 separate offenses: identity fraud, attempting to procure a prescription, and forgery. The identity fraud includes the use of a real physician's identifying information, that of Dr. James Woodmansey. The procurement of a prescription includes having other people procure or attempt to procure the prescriptions through deceit and lying about their relationship to the patient. And the forgery includes the act of authenticating the writing or the prescription in each instance, which purports to be the act of that Dr. James Woodmansey.
Thank you, Mr. Keller. That is a sufficient factual basis to support each of these 10 charges. Mr. Gaulden, to the charge of identity fraud, a 3rd-degree felony, 2 separate counts, how do you plead to both of those charges? Guilty, not guilty, or no contest?
No contest.
To the charge of forgery, a 3rd-degree felony, 2 separate counts, both of those being 3rd-degree felonies, how do you plead to those 2 charges?
No contest.
To the charge of pharmacy fraud, a Class A misdemeanor, 6 separate counts, how do you plead to each 6 of those charges?
No contest.
The court finds that you have knowingly and voluntarily entered your no contest pleas. I've signed this statement of defendant and will now enter that into the record. You have the right to be sentenced in not less than 2 days and not more than 45 days. It's my understanding that you would like to waive time for sentencing and be sentenced today. Is that correct, Mr. Gaulden?
Yes.
Okay. Let's hear first today from Mr. Williams or any of his other attorneys. I think I understand, based on the negotiated settlement, that the attorneys with the state and with Mr. Gaulden agreed to ordering that he pay a fine in the amount of $25,000.
Correct.
And that once that's been paid, which you do have a cashier's check, that the court reduced the 4 felony charges pursuant to 76-3-402 down to 4 Class A misdemeanors, and that then the court should just close his case.
That's correct, Your Honor. And unless the court has any questions of me, I'm happy to submit if the court's comfortable with that.
I am comfortable with that. I don't have any questions, but I will give you a chance if you'd like to state anything further for the record.
Your Honor, just procedurally, I understand that it does take time for minute entries to be updated. I, as I indicated, have a cashier's check in the amount of $25,000. In fact, Mr. Keller has been kind enough to, it was mailed to his office, hold that for a couple of weeks for us. I'm asking the court to enter that order, reducing those now and closing the case, anticipating that I can give this to some court staff before I leave.
Sure.
So as if we're treating it as if it's been paid, I'm holding it now. I just don't know who to give it to.
Okay. Angie, how long does that? On the way down? Yeah. All right,
will
so
do
after
that.
we're done with the sentencing here today, you can just go down to the front counter and pay that fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything further that his counsel online need to put on the record? I think I understand the global resolution, but if you'd like to put anything further on the record, you can do so now.
No, Your Honor.
Anything from the state, Mr. Keller?
The state will submit based on that stipulated agreement. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Gaulden, the court is going to impose a fine in the amount of $25,000 in order you to pay that today. It does appear that you do have a cashier's check in that amount now. And so based upon the stipulation between the state of Utah and Mr. Gaulden, the court will reduce his 4 felony counts on the identity fraud and the forgery down one step to Class A misdemeanors pursuant to Utah Code 76-3-402. And your case will close. Now, the reason that the court is willing to sentence you to just the fine and then closing the case, Mr. Gaulden, is because it's been represented to me that there is a global resolution between federal prosecutors and state prosecutors whereby you will be serving a substantial amount of time in federal prison, apparently 27 months, and after which 60 months of supervised probation, where you'll be monitored to make sure that you're doing well in your active recovery and that you are staying out of trouble and not having any dangerous weapons, including firearms, in your possession. Mr. Gaulden, I've seen so many times that good men and women who have a lot of talent and potential, that they can be robbed of that potential when they start to really struggle with their addiction. So I don't want that for you. You seem like a very talented young man. I'm hoping in your future that once you're done with your federal prison time, that you can be really successful on federal probation and have a really bright future where you can reach your full potential in every aspect of your life. Best of luck to you, Mr. Gaulden.
Thank you.
Anything
Thank you, Your
further?
Honor. That's all I have, if I could
Okay.
be excused. Your Honor, it's anticipated that